Hello YouTube, this is Matt Pullin, and I'm going to open this video with a quotation from Aron Nimzovitch. "The passed pawn," he wrote, "is like a criminal. It must be kept under lock and key. Mild measures, such as police surveillance, are not sufficient." Well, I've never played a game in my life that is a better illustration of that than this game right here from the Chicago Class Championships last week. This is my third round game against Sylvester Smarty, whose reign is 2096, and this was my only loss from that event. So here, my opponent has just played his rook to e6, and it's an even material endgame, but black has this big old passed pawn on e4. And I was trying to decide between two lines of play, or I had two candidate moves here. One is to play knight to e3, and the other is to play rook to d5. Now, knight to e3, this is the move I should have played. The computer actually likes the move I played better, but I think this is more principled. Knight to e3 gets in front of the passed pawn. It's blockaded, so the passed pawn now physically cannot move forward, which limits, of course, the power of the rook behind the passed pawn. The reason why I did not play this move, even though it's the safest move in the position, was I was concerned about knight to d4, cutting off that open file I had for my rook. However, I should not have been concerned about this because there's enough time for white to bring his rook around the edge and attack the weak pawn on c5. So this actually would have equalized. I mean, there's a trick after rook d6. He's threatening to play knight takes, and rook check, but I can just play king f1, and that eliminates the trick, and I'm preparing to play rook a5 and attack the pawn. And if I can get his rook to go passive, guarding the pawn by going to c6, then I think I've equalized. The trick, of course, is if I play rook a5, then knight takes c2, rook d2 check, and I'm going to lose the knight, and my opponent will have a significant advantage. So, alright, back to this critical position. Knight e3 is very, very safe. I decided to play rook d5 because it's more active. It prevents the rook from getting caught, by knight d4 in a passive position on d1. But I mean, it's a more active move. But I mean, the drawback of this move, and I calculated this, was it allows the opponent to push the pawn. A passed pawn and a rook behind it is a very powerful weapon in the endgame. So I had this reply ready because I knew he would push. I played knight to e5. This cuts off the rook from the passed pawn. And the passed pawn now, there's nothing in front of this passed pawn. I'm saying, okay, pawn, you can push if you want to, but my king is right here. So, he'll survey you and, stop anything you plan to do. But this is just very dangerous. My opponent played knight to d4, as I suspected he would, and I had this reply ready for him, but it's actually a losing blunder. My opponent Sylvester suggested this move after the game, rook takes c5. And rook takes c5, I think, gives me enough counterplay to draw the game. I mean, after rook takes c5, my rook can get behind this b pawn and stop it, and my king can get in front of the e pawn. And I have counterplay with my passed pawn as well, the pawn on c4. So this actually would have been a very legit way to play this, but no, I decided to play rook to d8. And this is just, I don't know, it's just a bad idea. I mean, my idea is king h7, which is forced, and then h5. I'm intending to win the exchange by playing like knight to g6, threatening checkmate on h8. But I don't know. This is it's just wrong because it underestimates the power of the opponent's passed pawns. After knight to c6, attacking my rook, I have nothing better to do anyway than to play back to d5, and then my opponent played knight d4, and I played rook d8 again. And my opponent went in for this, calculated sacrifice. He captures on c2, and he's going to lose the exchange. But he's going to get these two very powerful passed pawns, which work in tandem beautifully with the knight. So I played knight to g6, and this threatens checkmate with rook to h8. So he has to take. Rook takes, pawn takes, king takes. And in this position, white is already lost, although I thought that I would be better here. I badly misjudged the position. So here, I played rook to d6 check with the idea of preventing his king from moving any further forward. Everything is losing here. The computer, Ribka, suggests king to f3 as being the best move for white, but I've also worked this out to be a loss. For brevity's sake, we'll just look at the moves played in the game. Rook to d6 check, and then if he plays his king forward, like to f5, then I play king f3, and the mate threat gives white the initiative. But my opponent played king f7. He knows that his knight and pawns are going to win by themselves. So I played king f1 here to get in front of the pawn. I can't play king f3 because if I play king f3, then knight d4 check. And now all these squares are taken away from my king. And if I take this pawn, then knight f5 check, winning the rook. So king f3 is not possible. So I played king f1, and my opponent played b3. Now we see he has two passed pawns. And this was the 40th move of the game. I had like 5 minutes to make this move. And as deep as I looked, I couldn't find anything decent for white. I mean, everything is just lost. I decide on rook b6 in the game. If I play king d2, then there's knight to d4 check. Again, I can't visit any of these squares, and I can't take the pawn either. So let's say king d1. Now e2 check. And, going under the pawn, king to e1. Then b2, threatening to queen. So now the only move is to bring the rook to get behind the pawn. And now knight c2 check, king takes pawn, knight b4, and the game is over. There's no way to prevent b1 queen. Because of the pawn on c5, this is important. It allows the knight to cut off the rook from the queening square. Alright, so that was king e2. Let's see, other moves that fail. Rook d1, if I try to get in front of the pawn with rook d1, he plays knight to d4, threatening to, win. So I have to move the rook, and then just h5, taking control of this square. And look, none of these squares can be penetrated. I can't go to any of these squares with the king. Can't take this pawn because the knight's on it. Can't take the knight because the pawn's on the knight. My opponent is just going to penetrate with his king and slaughter. So this also would have been a loss. I played rook b6 in the game, getting behind the passed pawn. And if my opponent had played knight b4, which I thought he would, then I would have played rook d6 and then tried to get in front of the pawn. But my opponent found an even better move, king e7. And after king e7, the point is that takes away the square that my rook needs to get in front of the pawn. So I played f5, threatening to play check and take this pawn if he ever moves the knight. But my opponent played king to d7. And again, this square is taken away. So, I could have resigned here. I played on like rook b7 check, king c6, rook takes, b2. And again, there's no way to get in front of the... There's no way to get behind the pawn. There's no way to get in front of the pawn. Is just lost. So some more moves were played, and I resigned in this position because it's an obvious loss. Well, yeah. So I learned. I knew the adage from Aron Nimzovitch, but I don't know. It didn't help me because my instinct went against it. My instinct was to play more actively with rook d5 as opposed to blockading the pawn like I should have. So yeah, I hope you learned from this lesson as I have. There's so many tricks with those two pawns and that knight against the rook. It's just unreal. So yeah, don't disrespect your opponent's passed pawns. If your opponent has a passed pawn in the middle game, or especially endgame, you want to blockade it ASAP. Well, thank you for watching this video, and have a good one.